Well, I would like to talk about the use, the making of pictures in a Jungian psychotherapy more practically. Uh, I would like to look at pictures with this question in mind. What is psychotherapeutically helpful? What is the use in the therapy of making pictures? I propose 4 different ways which corresponds to 4 different processes going on in the work with pictures. We can distinguish a process of emotional expression, a process of structuring, a process of fostering consciousness, and a process of symbolizing, a symbolizing process. We will look at that in 4 parts about these different aspects which are present in working with pictures in Jungian analysis. I will also show pictures, slides, in order to make my thoughts a little bit more alive. I hope it will work technically, and if it doesn't work, we will take it with humor. I start with the first aspect. Painting as a medium for expressing and channeling feelings. Making pictures may help to give a vivid expression to intense feelings. Instead of only speaking about feelings, about speaking that one is angry or depressed or desperate, pictures have this potential to make that more alive, more vivid, to bring out the energy contained in such feelings. And that's quite an important releasing aspect of working with pictures. Painting makes the emotions become alive and present. I would call that the dynamic function. Now we come to just the first picture, painting. Here. This is an example from a 27-year-old man who originally was caught in a very intellectual attitude. You see, it's very blue, color of referring to sky, to spirit. He made him look down this attitude on life from a very high arch of triumph-like position and from a rational point of view. The same man, then he discovered only much later, and thanks to making pictures, that there was in him a passionate, even explosive emotionality, as the picture seems to depict with the motives of the Mexican landscape with the smoking volcano on it. In doing so, the patient came down from the rigid height of his analytical overviewing and accessed the level of personally experienced and emotionally felt horizontal reality, as you say. Drawing pictures may also help in tragic moments when a person goes through very difficult periods where you feel that words are really not capable to express adequately. what the person is going through. There the image can give this unspeakable, at least some visual form. And this may provide some relief. We may call that the cathartic function of painting. That's an example for such a quality, for such a help or function of painting. It's an example of a 24 years old student who felt totally uncontained in his life, without any relational network, without any supporting connections to other people. This man realized that he was on the point to plunge in a dangerous free fall towards non-existence, like a ticking bomb, as we can see on this picture, and that the rescuing hand would hardly be able to withhold the autonomous and destructive energy. Later, in fact, he tragically committed suicide. Painting can also help a person to access an emotion which is smoldering, hidden and unclear in the underground. The emotion acquires then a shape, a face. It becomes identifiable so that one can relate to it. One can have a position towards it. We may call that the objectifying function of painting. Let's look in this context at this picture from a 24 years old young lady who always tried to maintain a kind of a very decent persona, who repressed all negative feelings, negative reactions to the life situation she was in, until the moment when within the process of her doing pictures, all of a sudden these skull-like cats appeared from the depth of her soul, and it seems as if these skulls, these cats, neglected by her, wanted to be seen and recognized. So the painting or making pictures can give a shape, an expression to something which is not enough articulated, not enough conscious. All these are examples for this quality of being a medium for expressing feelings. It's a kind of an energetic function of expression through pictures. Now we come to another point. The paintings or pictures can help to structure feelings, to structure impulses, contents from the unconscious. Free-floating moods, for instance, get a clear shape. The unlimited richness in images contained in the unconscious, suggested by the unconscious, this unlimited amount of images is limited to the size of one particular image, valid here and now. All that is reduced, compressed to one picture. Like here, for instance, a multiplicity of forms and shapes, clearly. concentrated in one picture. The unendingly diverse and suggestive possibilities of the unconscious are then subjected to the conditions of the two-dimensional visual space. That it's something very important what happens there. The openness of the unconscious, feelings, emotions, contents. This is forced, so to speak, to enter in the realm, in the space, in the psychological, in the field of consciousness for which the paper stands. In the visual space of the paper used, we find the up and the down. We find, of course, the foreground, the background, the right and the left. And there is only a limited area available for forms, colors, and objects. In such an organized and clearly defined visual space, the chaotic abundance of ideas acquires then clarity, becomes reliable, acquires consistency and structure. And this can also make an awareness possible and can allow a development to occur because it's concentrated, all this richness of unconscious content in this one picture here and now, and then in the next one. So this is really fostering a process of becoming more conscious. The structuring effect I'm speaking here about, the structuring effect of a painting as such is chosen as subject in this picture. It's a picture from a 20 years old man. The picture shows in its center a mandala-like geometrical form. What is expressed here as a theme has fundamental meaning and holds true for painting in general, with its well-known structuring effect. Painting brings into the amorphous, complex, floating multiplicity of anonymous contents and movements a clear form, a well-ordered cosmos with a screen, a framework, a center. That's exactly what this person needed so much, because he had a tendency to be really flooded by the unconscious. We see all these snakes crawling around, and he is looking for frame, structure, centering, and making pictures as such, independently from this one picture where it's the theme, has this quality to organizing the material, the psychic material. It's amazing how efficiently the structuring gestures of making pictures by simply projecting inner images onto a limited four-angled screen works. It is determined and put in front of the author. The author no longer is unconsciously subjected to it, but he can then relate to this objectified content, has it in front. The picture has then the solidity, the consistency of something like an object. You can store it, you can remember it, you can refer to it. We meet here the same 45 years old man as before. The picture puts well in evidence what I said before regarding the objectifying visual formation as being one of the structuring aspects of painting. Pictures mediate an encounter between the author and the unconscious, as Murray already mentioned. The author can approach the unconscious in the form of a figure present in front of him and enter in a dialogue with it. This is made very visible, this quality of relating, thanks to the fact that it's objectified. This encounter with the unconscious, which is understood and treated as an effective and objective reality. That's probably the most important basic concept in Jung's method of active imagination. You refer to an objective reality, even if it's an inner reality in your inner representation, your fantasy. Painting allows the manifestation of the unconscious as an autonomous reality, different from the conscious mind, and to which one can enter in a relationship. Now, I come to a third aspect. After the expressing feeling, after the structuring aspect of painting, I come to a third point. Painting can help foster the process of becoming conscious, making conscious. Becoming conscious, it's a kind of a alpha and omega of all analytical work. Certain lacks or wrong directions in one's own development, one's own personality may become visible. Pictures may show certain one-sidedness, for instance, suggest corrections as far as the ideal image of oneself is concerned. One could say that the picture is in this sense like a mirror presented to the author of the painting. Whether or not it is the intention of the author, these pictures say something. They reveal aspects which the person hasn't been aware of or not aware enough. Here it is. This picture is made by a 27-year-old man. It confronts the painter, the author of the painting, with the fact that, obviously enough, the two areas of, you can see the head and the back, have developed disproportionately. The author becomes aware of this inner malformation. His urge to become aware of the hypertrophy of his intellect, of his brain, of his head, which has expanded like a cancerous growth. There's also a tendency to be over-concerned, as can be seen in the pressuring sorrows in his back. On the contrary, to ignore what is in the back of his self-image. It seems as if these tendencies want to be acknowledged, and the picture is a medium to become aware of that in a very convincing, even shocking way. Another way in which painting fosters the process of becoming conscious consists in the fact that it can help to remember the past and making the past alive again. It's amazing how, thanks to painting, there are often all your memories becoming all of a sudden alive, even if it was not the intention of the painter to refer to childhood experience. Atmospheres and motives come up which belong to the life horizon of childhood, or which reactivate situation from the family background. A part of one's childhood and family history, or even archaic and primitive backgrounds of a collective nature, enter then in the picture. Here, this is a picture made by a 44 years old author. It's a successful manager who has cut for himself totally from his past. He's living very much only on the level of head, which can be easily seen here. But we can also see how this doing paintings, doing pictures, helps him to become aware of this being cut from another side in him, from his past. And by doing so, it helps reconnecting to the origins. This doesn't necessarily mean a reference to the farmer's background of the family this person in reality stemmed from. It can also mean, in a more symbolical sense, a reconnection with the natural, the sensate, the primitive aspects of one's person. There's a reconnecting with more the past and the more archaic, primitive nature. That's also a quality painting brings in very often. Now, a painting can also foster consciousness, and that's another aspect of how it fosters consciousness. When one looks at the way the elements are displayed within a special context provided by the paper in relationship to the representation of the background, the different aspects of one's here and now reality are like embedded in something vaster, in a master container. And this becomes like optically, visually clear in the vaster container of the family context, of social condition, because the painting is a medium of expression in the realm of space. It fosters an awareness of the rootedness of the individual in its both in his immediate personal reality and his social container it's living in. And it shows the relationship between the two, the ego and the container, the figure and the ground. Here you have an example from a 43 years old lady. She depicts herself on the left. She's dressed in yellow. She is sitting together with her sister, who is in blue, on the right side. This expresses a situation of being totally caught in a social framework, in a social world of social rules, conventions. Both are sitting in a very upright and overcorrect attitude on chairs which confine more than they carry, and they stare rigidly and without any personal expression into space. A colorful, emotional expression of oneself seems not to be allowed. They have white skin, no red no blood being expressed. Now the picture confronts the author of it with the fact that she is heavily absorbed by the collective. Apparently it tries to make her aware of this alienating situation. It dramatizes this lack of individual, personal aliveness, and it slightly exaggerates. It produces a helpful, probably, shock. Then the fourth point, referring to this aspect of fostering awareness done through, or realized through painting. Painting can also point to a central problem one haven't been aware of, and this mainly happens through technical mishaps, technical limitations. They are very often very helpful, just where something is not possible to realize the way one would like. There is a kind of revealing aspect. Something wanted to show another side one wasn't aware of. The painting makes the things happen which escape one's own control. And one could say is as if a mercurial trickster would be involved. And these uncontrollable mistakes reflect to the painter an objective record of his real psychic situation. And this beyond one's own assumptions, beyond one's own ideal image of oneself. It's a kind of a very objective image of the way one really is, or where the problem also is at the present moment. Let's look at this picture. It's a 23 years old author. Something is living within a barricaded world. The picture reflects in a very impressive way the life situation of a schizoid, lonely man. At the same time, it points to the central psychological problem of this person. There's someone located in the center of the picture where we see on a pedestal a kind of a lion transformed into a statue. The animal could well be a dog or a pet or a calf, a winged being or a lion. It becomes obvious that the painter, the author of this picture, is in himself a weak and undefined person who vacillates between the status of soft pet or wild lion, and that he raises himself over the level of mediocre human being. He's on a pedestal. It's the neurotic kernel the author of the painting is confronted with. Elevating himself over the conditions of normal human life and identifying with an illusionary ideal of kind of grandiose sovereignty. How are we with the time? It's fine.
Do you want to take some questions?
Yeah, so far we go then move forward to the more important point, the process of symbolization, which is the real Jungian, specifically Jungian approach of the working with pictures, but it's perhaps just a moment before we go on to give you a chance to address some questions, to make comments. If ever you want to, we can also come back to pictures.
Maybe we could have a question first from Wilmington.
Yes, Stephen, we might have a question or two down here.
Yeah, I do have one right now. Thought. Hello.
Hello?
If pictures mediate the dialogue between the author and the other, and you are the witness to the client that you're working with, and you are the psychotherapist in that role, what is the relationship if the psychotherapist does not have very much experience transversing these worlds themselves? You know, if they haven't come to this way of being or thinking where they have explored their own inner journey, and they are just applying this methodology to their, their psychotherapy practice. I'm very interested in that relationship between where you go as a therapist and where you ask your clients to follow in some way. First, by example, maybe more would be helpful than do as I say, not as I do.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the need?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think it's very important that the analyst would have also his own experience in using painting. It's the same as with working with the dreams. We would never do a good job if we would just do dream interpretation, having studied dream symbolism, read something about how one uses the dreams, when you didn't really work on your own dreams as an analyst. That holds also for the medium of pictures. But I know that very often many analysts say, well, it's not a medium which fits really well with me, or I don't feel so comfortable with it. They do active imagination perhaps in another form, or they tried and did not find really themselves capable in entering in a vivid dialogue with the unconscious through such a medium. Nevertheless, I think they can do it, but or use it in a therapeutical setting. Nevertheless, it's probably not. They will not constellate that, or will not help the analyst and really to trust this type of language and this type of dialogue. You see, I was during many years in charge of the picture archive we have at the Jung Institute in Zurich, where, among others, we have the material from Jung's clients. And there are hundreds of pictures which show to which extent it was an important element in the work with clients for Jung. But you see, as he himself valued so much this medium of entering in contact with his own depth, it must have been very easy for them too to trust that as being a real way. So I don't think that when an analyst doesn't have his own experience that it would be doing harm, but it would be not a big help probably. It wouldn't animate analysis and to use that medium. Yes? Is that okay?
So you're talking about authenticity in the relationship as well, and that ability to have that communication be much more authentic.
Yeah, exactly.
Between the business and the client, which makes so much sense, of course. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Other question?
I have one. Have you observed parallels in the active imagination of the therapist, like yourself and the client, as well as possibly the artwork?
I didn't understand can you, the last, can you repeat your question again?
Have you noticed some parallels or similarities of themes connecting the analysis and the artwork and your own active imagination and that of your client?
Yeah. I'm amazed to see that, particularly when you're involved in a creative activity as an analyst, you're working perhaps on a theme or for an article or for preparing a lecture or something like that, that your fantasy, of course, is very much orientated towards the topic you are working on, and that you find then, by kind of a coincidence, very often themes or questions also, or even images in your own clients. I remember what Marie-Louise Fontfrance, the important disciple of Jung, said that whenever she is working on a theme which is very important to her, and she has questions, the answers just enter the room through her analyses. I think that it's particularly true when you are working yourself as analyst with your own pictures, your own imaginations. You are very close, or closer, to your, what we could call the reality and the constellating factor of the transcendent function. And this can easily also produce synchronistic events. I don't mean that it's always happening, but it can. So your question is, if that a similarity or a parallelity or a parallelism between motives appearing in the painting or in the pictures done by the analysans and in my own fantasies, I can say yes, but it doesn't. In the case of the material I saw in the picture archive, I was in charge of that archive for several years. I thought sometimes, isn't there a kind of a transference aspect in these many beautiful pictures done by Jung's analysans? There are wonderful mandalas. Is that due to the authentic, immediate expression of the unconscious wanting to give that content to these analysans, or was it also a little bit under the influence of knowing Jung's own publications on the theme? So one can't exclude that there can be such a influence happening which is of course not what we are looking for.
Thank you.
Okay? Other?
Maybe one more question, is there,
Reminder, please mute your microphone.
Yes?
would there be one,
Mute your microphone.
maybe one more question from Raleigh? I don't think, we didn't hear from Raleigh before. Does Raleigh have a question?
I have a question. I have one question. In the picture with the two women in the dresses, they, obviously they didn't have any feet.
I just
They're
go
also-
back. Yeah.
Okay,
Let me go back to it.
okay.
I think it's back just one.
It's 11. Just a moment. This one? Is
Yeah.
it that one?
I was just wondering,
Yeah,
there's,
that's what.
yes, uh-huh. There's a black dot below each one of them. Is that somehow because of holes punched in the painting to put it in a...
Unfortunately, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean nothing.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But there are no features.
Yeah.
That's a simple question, that's all I had.
Yeah. A technical question. Yeah. It's very visible now. Unfortunately, it doesn't belong to the picture itself. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Well, it is interesting that they seem to have no feet. It seems to fit in with the other things you were saying about this.
Exactly.
house
Yeah.
and-
It's a kind of not standing on the ground, not standing on them in themselves. It's a kind of being so much adapted to what is surrounding with this view, this look of expectation, and to be over adapted to what is around, and losing the groundedness and their own stand in themselves. Yeah. So you pointed to this absence of a standpoint or a lack of own feet and being able to use them. And the points would have been a kind of a hopeful promise, but unfortunately there are just holes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. Now I come to a fourth point. The fourth aspect, process of symbolization going on in the painting process. Painting makes symbols emerge. Of course, we are here in the very homeland of Jungian way of understanding and working with pictures. The symbols emerging through painting help to reorientate the conscious mind of the painter and to transcend ego barriers. We may call this the transcending dimension of the symbols. By the way, this is a very important aspect, this transcending the borders and the ego barriers. Murray was mentioning that before in his explanations, that interpreting a painting, interpreting images can be very dangerous, but because it's once again reducing, it has an effect which is just against the real use and the real intention, so to speak, of a painting. It's bringing the painting back to the brain, to lock it in the narrow mind, and it's against this tendency. The picture as such has to open, to transcend this narrowness of one's own overconscious perspective. I told him just in the break that I think that's very true, but at the same time, perhaps there are moments where interpreting pictures in the psychotherapeutical setting is helpful too, because patients are not happy with what they did. They think it's nothing but, I just wanted to show that and I'm not gifted. So interpretation can really help them to discover that it's more than they thought. It has more value, it's deeper, it's unexpectedly rich. And when one has this in mind, this type of interpretation or this goal, that it doesn't reduce it, lock it into a kind of nothing but if on the contrary it's opening and giving a value and help the author being amazed about what happened, that there is, for instance, a symbolical beauty in it, even if aesthetically and technically it's a limited thing, then in this context interpretation can also help. That's just a short comment in the context of what I'm saying about the transcendent dimension of the symbol. It opens. And now we have here an example. This is a picture from a 32-year-old man. You see it's a snake-like or dragon-like being with a mammalian head and with a crown at the top. The being has obviously a symbolic character. It seems as if a mysterious chthonic animal belonging to the underworld will be honored with a crown. We could think it's like showing a coronation of a lower, earthy nature spirit. It's this spirit which is celebrated here and which deserves a kind of a royal attention. It means that this is the new principle, the king, the crown, which should get recognition. A value system, for instance, on the basis of respecting the soul's instinct. In general terms, one could say that a painting serves as a container and as a stage for an emerging symbol. The symbol can appear in front of the inner eye, and thanks to this enactment, it can trigger the effect of stimulating insights and activating changes of consciousness. Now another point, also in this context of symbolizing. The symbol process involved does not only find, so to speak, symbols, like just in the example I showed you before with this snake-like being with the crown on it. That's obviously a kind of a symbol all of a sudden presenting itself as a such. It's a symbolic object being represented, found perhaps in a dream or coming up while painting. The symbolic process in itself, and that's another thing, is a process of symbolization, where something is transformed into the status of a symbolic entity. For instance, there is an initial call, something which started in the beginning to make one paint. I suggest, for instance, if there is a painful feeling, one should try to enter in it to give it an authentic, really true, sincere expression. Or there's a psychic trouble, there is a physical distress. It's a very helpful starting point for doing pictures. This represents the raw material of sensations which the person may try to express in the most authentic way, as I said. What happens then is a very curious transformation process, where at first nothing else had probably been intended than just the expression, a kind of a document of an unpleasant feeling, as truly as possible, later on transforms into a picture which is shaping or giving shape to something much more than only a kind of emotional protocol. It is an autonomous picture in which another dimension of the psyche is actively involved, coming into play and collaborating in the formation of the picture. This other dimension, or this cooperating other, may agree with the feeling one initially tried or intended to express, or it may apparently ignore it and bring in its own viewpoints according to its own agenda. So one starts with, from an ego point of view, from a need, from a situation of pain, of odd, negative feeling. One tries to give that the expression, but it transforms in something, when one looks at it then as a symbolic product, which becomes very different from what was the initial intention. Let us see that here. That's a painting made by a person I have already shown before. It's a very simple but very rich painting, a rich picture. It's done by this 20-year-old man. We can understand what different aspects of the symbolization process going on in painting thanks to this picture. It's representing an amazing amount of aspects being really involved in the symbolization happening through painting. We focus on the three elements. The house, you see, it's a kind of a house. The symbolization takes place in an inner house. Murray was insisting so much. It's this inner reality. It's not a normal house, it's a kind of an inner space. In order to cope with the symbolization process, the author has to be ready and capable to enter this unreal, real space of fantasy and of creative play. Then we concentrate on the kiln in the middle. We can say symbolization can be understood also as a kind of a melting process, as can be seen on the picture with the central motive of this furnace or the kiln, which resembles an alchemical athanor. This kiln is more or less the stomach of the whole transformation process. Here takes place the miracle of the production of the picture as the quintessence of different elements participating. There are many things involved in the production of a picture. As we said, the searching fantasy of the ego, the sudden ideas offered by the unconscious, then the feelings of sadness, anger I was referring to, which keep the fire of visual expression ongoing. That's the feeling which is involved. All these ingredients and subliminal events which converge in the creative formation process symbolize the kiln and the melting process which takes place in it. And then finally the third motive I see, we have two strange channels in a zigzag form between the top and the bottom. It shows indirectly that symbolization is a dialectical process. On this picture, two levels are brought in connection, one with the other. At the bottom, there is the ego level. We have the initials of the author, WM. It stands for where the ego stands. And at the top there is the triangular roof, a little bit separated by this blue line. It's a kind of a greater ego, a higher vis-a-vis, a kind of a spirit or self. Between these two levels, ground and top roof, two levels, endless movements back and forth take place, as suggested by the two zigzag channels. Now, if we transpose that into the reality of picture making, we could think of the tentative efforts back and forth between the two sides, which are always involved. These are the channels through which the exchange happens between one's own acting and the foreign pole's doing, so that the picture slowly takes shape step by step. So it's a nice summary. Of course, it's not intended by the author of the picture as such, but because he wanted just to follow an inner fantasy. But when we look at it as a symbolic reality, we find in it a representation which is quite extraordinary of different aspects of active imagination and the working of the transcendent function as such. Well, I come to another point, and we'll show another picture. Painting offers the psyche of the patient a container in which things past can transform and new things be announced. Murray has also referred to that, these two aspects. The picture as a symbolic container of transformation. Both dimensions have in common the fact that something through painting begins to flow again perhaps, and is thereby put in the energetic state of becoming. That corresponds to the flowing essence of the psyche. Now we'll look to this past, reference to the past, and to the anticipating the future. Painting dissolves into movement. This can be very important when a person suffers from psychic indurations, traumas, for instance, having occurred in childhood, which have ensued defensive fear, rigidity, or also when physical phenomena are interfering, which are characterized by a blocked energy. In such a case, painting has a releasing, even redeeming effect. It can transform into a pictorial reality the hardness of what happened in the past and the inevitability of physical disease. The expression through painting of heavy traumatizing experiences which occurred during childhood can lead the author of the picture beyond the mere obsessive repetition of memories. Unexpectedly, a new perspective may enter the picture, or a new perception or new vision or what has been experienced, and thereby something in the past can change. It's this transforming of past in its own blocked state into an image where new insight, new attitude towards what had occurred can happen. But there's just the opposite aspect too. Painting doesn't only dissolve past events into lively memories, it can also anticipate the not yet known in the future. And this corresponds, as Murray also said, to what Jung said about the teleological aspect of the symbol, which is a very important aspect in the conception of the symbol by Jung. In the container of the picture, future insights can be prepared and anticipated. And it's thanks to this anticipatory and preparatory quality of the symbol, which is generating knowledge, that Jung could say that the most essential ideas were all founded in the period of life when he was intensively practicing active imagination. Now here is a picture from a 44 years old woman, dressed in red with long black hair, kneeling on the earth in front of a rock wall to the left and receiving the water from the rock in a container she holds in her hands. In this, somewhat clumsy, but nevertheless very touching picture, made with finger paintings, something of what we were just saying in general terms about the picture as a symbolic container of transformation. This becomes here visible. The painter holds a container in her hands. That means she has an active connection to a symbolic receptacle where things are contained and processed. I mean, she has an active connection to the reality of pictures. Thanks to the fact that she has such a symbol container, there is a water jet of psychic energy released from the stony, repelling wall of her past, the left side. Through the mediation of painting, a vivifying jet of water is freeing itself from a very burdened childhood, a childhood in her case which had caused compulsive reactions in the author. It means that she may be able to transform the traumatizing events into psychic experiences, that you may transform them into psychic memories so that they lose their obsessive character. Painting the events which had happened earlier and which had stiffened her of fear has now releasing and even redeeming effect. The unbearable factuality of the occurred is then transformed into psychic movement. Through the symbol container, a picture is. This facilitates psychic aliveness again, which needs for its well-functioning the movement of psychic energy. Okay. I come to a last point in my thoughts about the therapeutic value of painting. Painting makes gives a analysand the experience. Sometimes it's not true for every type of painting, but sometimes it gives an analysand the comforting, amazing experience of participating in an inner laboratory, in the genesis of new ideas, which are important not only to a person but in general too. While painting, the analysand realizes that through the painting something wants to get form and shape, which is enigmatic and beyond the importance and the value, and it has a numinous significance. And this stimulates a deep satisfaction about the fact of being involved in a creative endeavor. And here is the last picture of. It's a picture of a 45 years old man. We see at the top a Christian church with a very flat white facade, and at the bottom we see a kind of a pagan pantheon, a temple in the shape of a dark circular building. And then in between the two, between the Christian church and this dark black pagan pantheon, on the top of it we see like a jewel which emanates yellow light, also a circular room. The picture thus shows a person who seems involved in producing a special object of value, something very important, like this jewel-like aspect manifests, which as a symbolic third mediates between the upper world and of the collective consciousness and the lower world of the collective unconscious. The author is, so to speak, involved in finding a new church or a new sanctuary, a new container for experiencing sense-giving transcendence between these two worlds, two containers. Perhaps the new value offered as a container for experiencing sense could be mediating between the two separate poles, that this could be like the task. The experience of the creative spirit founded in the reality of the symbol. It will be a lively spirit, as the brilliant irradiation illustrates, in contrast to the two other rather lifeless buildings. And it will be an individual spirit in the circular one room, it's just a room for one person, in opposition to the collective space of the church and temple. It seems in such a picture the author becomes aware of being involved in creating something, a symbolic reality, that it's not just expressing momentaneous present bad temper or negative mood, but that it's really the work in giving shape to something which has a uniting and meaning-giving sense. Okay. Now where we are time-wise.
Fine. Questions? Maybe we could go to Asheville for questions to Paul Britchie. Are there any questions from Asheville? Comments?
Bob Hayden, where you come up. First of all, one comment before. I want to let folks know that we have the pleasure to have both presenters there in Zurich. So feel free to ask either Paul or Murray questions. So if you have a question you want to direct towards one or the other, feel free to do so, or just leave it up to the presenters to decide if he wants to field one. Bob is here and wants to ask a question. My guess is towards Murray, but he can ask it towards either one. Okay. Go ahead, Bob.
Murray, it occurs to me that Jesus, when he went in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, and then there appeared to him the devil, and he got in conversation with the devil in a vision, that he was most likely involved in active imagination. And how does that feel to you?
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think anytime you start speaking with the spirits, I mean, what is the devil? It's the invisible becomes visible. We would say it's a manifestation of a content from the unconscious. It was, it was a temptation. Jesus was tempted to power because he had all these amazing gifts, and he had a very strong sense of himself. So naturally, you would expect that he would be tempted to power. And lo and behold, what manifests itself to him when he goes into the desert. Of course, you have to go into the desert because in the desert there's nothing to distract you. And there the unconscious can manifest, right? When you go into the darkness and there aren't objects around you, or there isn't, you aren't in the middle of a city, there the unconscious can make itself known. And it did so in such a decisive and explicit way. It's one of the most vivid moments of the could say of the spiritual dimension of Jesus' existence on earth, those conversations that he had with the devil. I mean, another moment is the moment of his transfiguration, when again the light side appears, and the people around him also see that. So I mean, they're both sides. You could say when he's in prayer with and his Father reveals himself to him, or a voice appears, that's a kind of active imagination. We would say that's active imagination today. You hear a voice, you see an image, you have a dialogue and a conversation with the invisible. And of course, this really was the major turning point in Jesus' mission, turning down the invitation to power that the devil offered him. If he hadn't done that, if he hadn't had that experience, if the shadow had remained unconscious to him, he wouldn't have been able to carry out his mission. So he became conscious.
He had to deal with three parts of his shadow
Yeah,
that he had to deal with, so he could carry out his mission.
that's right. And
Okay, well,
so,
it seems like there's a lot of similarity, and that makes stuff a lot more real for me, and makes a lot of connections, and I think that's one way that Jung was very, very helpful.
great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question, because it really does show you something that Paul said: the unconscious becomes visible and conscious, and if the shadow doesn't become visible and conscious, then we just tend to act it out. And Jesus wouldn't have been able to do his mission without being conscious of this temptation toward power.
May I add something? Jung was very insisting very much on the fact that his method was called active imagination, and he wanted to make sure that this was a very important element. This active,
Yes.
that you don't let you just flood by an inner fantasy, but you enter in a relationship, you take a position. You also have to ethically take a position. And that's This temptation of Jesus in the desert is a very good example for this active aspect of it. It's not just following it without any critical position, but he is experiencing it, the fantasy as such,
Exactly, yeah.
but then he refers to it and
Yeah.
takes a stand.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that question. That was marvelous.
We have one more question from Asheville, and then maybe we can go to the other sites. But one more from Asheville, right downstairs.
Otto. Hi, Otto.
Is there on the unconscious level, is there a communication or interaction between the subject of your active imagination or the direction of your active imagination and the contents or directions you may get out of dreams? In other words, do the dreams confirm or affirm or reaffirm the direction you take with your active imagination, or is it the other way around? Does the outcome of your active imagination affect your dreams?
Okay, good question. It's not something you can state with engineering precision. I know Otto is trained as an engineer, and he's a very good one. There is a connection, there is a relation, but let me just say a few things about that. When you look at the intermingling of active imagination and dreams that Jung depicts in these cases that he describes, it's usually that the active imagination picks up on a dream motif and carries it a step further. So the normal relationship is that active imagination is a way of dreaming the dream onward, of taking it another step. Say the dream didn't quite finish, or you would like to see where is it going from here, what is the unconscious trying to say with this dream. You might go back into the dream in your active imagination space that I described before, or with a painting, as Paul has been describing. You might pick up a pen or a pencil or a brush, and you kind of put yourself back into the dream and you let it continue and you see what happens. So then there's a real continuity, a link between that active imagination and the dream. You might then later have a dream that picks up on the same motif and you can see a connection. But it would be much more unusual to see the dreams so strongly responding to active imaginations. It can happen because they both come out of the unconscious, but I think of them, dreams come from so many different places in the unconscious, and they pick up on so many surprising and unexpected themes that it's hard to say that there is a consistent relationship between dream and active imagination that you might have had the day before. It's usually the other way around. I had an extraordinary experience one time myself. I had a dream about my father coming to me, okay? And my father died, I don't know, he died in the late 70s, so I had this dream of maybe in the mid-90s, about 20 years or so after his death. And he came to me and he was, we had a conversation, and I woke up wondering, why did I have that dream? It didn't mean very much to me. I couldn't make anything of it. It was a nice picture of my father, but nothing terribly surprising. So I took that dream into my active imagination the next day. So I recreated the scene of the dream with my father, and I'm walking down the street with my father, and then suddenly I see that my father is walking on top of water. And that really surprised me. That wasn't in the dream, that was in the active imagination. Now, I don't think of my father as a saint at all. I saw his dark side, I saw all his negative qualities. Basically, I have a positive relationship to him, but I don't idealize him particularly. But in the dream, he was walking on the water. And I thought, well, that's strange. Why is he doing that? And we had a conversation. And it was obvious that he was somehow coming from another dimension, or he wasn't, his feet weren't on the ground in the way mine were on the ground as I was walking along. And I still didn't understand what this was about. It was a nice conversation. And later that day, or it was the next day, I had a surprising message from my cousin that my uncle, who had been healthy, hadn't had a sick day in his life, and he was 80 years old, had suddenly died. And he had died of, in 3 days, he was working in a hospital, and he caught something in the hospital, and it turned into meningitis, and he suddenly passed away without ever having been ill in his life. So nobody expected this death. And then I understood what this dream was about. That my father and my uncle, it was actually my mother's brother, had been quite close in the family and in the relationship, and I'd been very close to this uncle. And this was like a synchronistic moment of coming together. And the way I thought about it was, well, my father came to, pick up my uncle. And they were going to go on together. That's how I put it together. And it was so moving and so meaningful to me that my father had appeared. I don't dream about him very often, every now and then. But it was this combination of the dream and the active imagination that really gave me such a feeling of connection and meaning. So synchronicity is also brought into it. And Paul mentioned this, the synchronistic moments that can constellate around powerful dream or active imagination experiences are of the symbolic, that these kinds of surprising clusters of inner and outer combinations happen. Sometimes it's with your patients, if you're an analyst, or sometimes it's with close friends or loved ones, that they're drawn into this field, or you're all part of a field. And that's how I think of it. So I like your question, Otto, that, the psyche is unified at some level. Often we can't see how our active imagination and our dreams might be linked together, but if a synchronicity happens, I think we have something to go on. We can say, yeah, we live in a unified field in a world that is whole and one, and these things are all part of it. Often the connections are very difficult to ascertain, but they're there.
Could add one aspect as refers to this connection between dreams and active imagination. There are dreams who are very intense, or they bring amazingly strange or very impressive, beautiful images, and where one feels very pushed to give that, not only to receive that more than not only by interpreting, but by saying it means that and that and that, and then it's killed, it's reduced to wonderful, perhaps, thought. You have to incorporate that, or bring that into your feeling. You feel that it's such a numinous quality of it. It would be inadequate to have only an intellectual, interpretative approach. So painting there can be an adequate way to give it the quality, the value of through the picture and in a picture. Very often, of course, then the picture is, when it's intended to be just a photograph of what you have seen, as one is not a great artist and one is not capable, like Birkhäuser, who did these wonderful paintings of dreams. One is then disappointed, but because one isn't capable of copying the inner experience in a visual way. But it would be then wrong also just to try to illustrate it. It's good to have a medium to, through painting, through colors, to be with the image, and but one has to be open to the fact that it will transform in itself. It's not when you want to maintain it just as a copy, then it doesn't work. It's a kind of an outer shell without meaning. So it's entering in the feeling suggested, created by such an impressive image, and then allow the image to be expressed in its own way through the active in the content of a painting, and not just using the visual medium as a direct copying of what you have seen.
I would just like to, you mentioned color, and I just flashed Otto's wife, Ruth, is also there in the audience, is a wonderful painter, and the colors are so vivid in her paintings. It reminded me years ago when I started doing active imagination, working on my dreams and so on, I did a lot of painting, and I got tremendously absorbed in it. I would lose track of time. I rarely had such an experience that it was so gripping, but especially color. And I got totally fascinated by color and the vividness of certain colors, and using color to express emotion. Could you just say a word about that, about color? I know you've studied this at great length, and you appreciate artists and what they do with structure and color, but especially color in working therapeutically.
Yeah, color has an enormous energy and enormous power. We know that in real normal life too, but or you comes to just in my mind when you have the Rorschach test. I don't know if it's very known in,
Yes,
in the States too. It must. There are the first plates, just only gray and black and white, and then appears the first card in color, and it's very often a red color. It's shocking.
Yeah.
It brings in a totally new energy. Color is mediating energy, and therefore it's so helpful. The painting too. Of course, you shouldn't force analysts and to do paintings and to use colors. It's perhaps a very meaningful, or it's the only thing a person is allowing himself or herself to do, to try to express something just with pencil, because there is a fear of exposing oneself too much in the color, or to not to be able anymore to avoid what you have expressed. But when the color appears, it's something where really soul in its immediate energy can manifest itself. There's a lot to say about the different psychological meanings of the medium you use in doing pictures. There are those who are, for instance, using only pencil. Pencil, it's a medium which is not allowing color to express, and you can erase it. So it's just, I don't trust totally the inner autonomous image. I try obediently, perhaps, or because I was suggested to do it by the analyst to do it, but I could also immediately take it off. So when the color doesn't allow that, it's there you commit yourself. You are really in it. It's And we know very much how much colors have their own specific effect. One knows that when puts blue light, for instance, on meat, you will not anymore want to eat that meat, because it changes the quality of it. It gets bone-like.
It's dead.
And that's the blue, which has its own specific quality.
Well, Paul and I had the opportunity to look through the Red Book together in a small group a couple of months ago. And one of the things that struck me most by it's the first time I'd actually seen a real copy of the Red Book, was the strength of the color of Jung's paintings. And I'm sure that the printing, which is being done very, very carefully and very precisely, will bring that out. So people will be able to see what an amount of strong color Jung put into his paintings. They are so vivid. They're not pastels. They are really, really strong colors. And that just jumped out at me in looking through
Yeah,
that.
it's very amazing how intense the coloring is.
Yeah. Well, some other questions. Should we go to Omaha? Is there a question from Omaha or a comment?
Yes, we have two questions. A question that I have, and I want to thank both of you for presenting.
The sound is not so good.
The sound is not so good.
There, that's better. That's better.
Better.
That's better.
That's better.
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to thank both you gentlemen for presenting today. It's been very good. The problem with active imagination and the tendency sometimes to slip into fabricating or
Yeah.
projecting into the image and, having the image respond in the way that the ego would respond. That seems to be particularly difficult sometimes to allow the autonomy or allow this objectivity to come in. Could you speak to that, please?
Yes, that's why, this, I wanted to emphasize that quality of Geshan lesson or Wu Wei, that it really is a dialogue, because people have often told me when they start doing active imagination, it feels like they're just making up everything, and they probably are. It's mostly coming out of the ego, and they want to. It's like having some vivid daydreams, and you can spin out yarns, and if you've got a good imagination, it goes all over the map. You're traveling around the world or into outer space or who knows what adventures you're having. I try to slow that down. I try to say, stop for a moment and just let a figure speak to you. And until the figure shows some autonomy, and you really have the feeling they're surprising you, they are giving you something that you genuinely didn't make up. It doesn't come out of the ego. Like in Jung's example, she named herself Salome, and he named himself Elijah. That surprised him. Now, those names aren't unfamiliar. I mean, those are familiar biblical names. And Jung had read a lot, and all of his active imaginations, I know Sonu Shamdasani has gone through the Red Book and pinned almost every active imagination figure and scene to some book in Jung's library. But that doesn't mean that they weren't genuine, authentic experiences, because they made their own selection. They came out, they spoke to him, he went through a process that maybe he'd read about it, but he really went through it. And it's in the feeling. It's in the feeling that this is a process that I am not controlling and that I am not designing, and that grips me. what you're describing is these sort of spun out yarns that have a kind of superficial quality to them, and they're like cartoons or something you've seen on TV. And there's a sort of passivity in the ego. You're kind of watching all this. You aren't really in it. Active imagination means that your ego, as Paul said a moment ago, is really drawn into it and becomes a participant and is affected. So you have this interpenetration. They grip you, you grip them, and it doesn't go so fast. There's a kind of rhythm that comes out of that process. It isn't jumpy, it doesn't race through, it isn't an action movie. It's more like a really good conversation with somebody where you don't know what he's going to say next, and you can't program it, and you wait, and then you respond, and there are pauses, and maybe half an hour goes by and nobody says anything. And then you pick up the next time you see that person, and you carry it a step or two further. That's the quality of genuine active imagination. And I agree, it's hard to get to that. I think it takes patience, and it takes a kind of willingness to let the other speak and let the other be the other.
Thank you. We have one more question.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This question is for Paul. Would you elaborate on the comment that the analyst
Can you speak a little bit
You have to hold
louder?
the microphone closer, we can't hear you.
Would you elaborate, Paul, on your comment that the analyst's interests add value to the patient's drawing? How do you assist or present that to the patient so that you're not interpreting what they've drawn?
But you're giving
Yeah.
value.
How to give value without reducing the meaning of the picture to just a kind of a intellectual thing you can say about it. How to express the value through interpretation. That's your question, yeah? Yeah, it's first of all it's very important, I think, to avoid any kind of use of Jungian terminology when you are saying, here we have it, your anima, for instance. This would be not valuing, but doing a kind of reductionism in a Jungian sense. You reduce what you see to just something known, or that's killing and it's lacking also respect for the symbolical, unknown reality of the image.
And
So
the uniqueness.
the uniqueness, yeah.
Yeah.
You reduce it to just something you know already, or which is not more than. So to avoid such a kind of use of concepts is very important. What is very helpful is just to ask the author of the painting how it did develop. It's a kind of a way to visit together the image, to explore it together in an interpretative way. It's without interfering too much, but it's really being together, analysand and analyst, close to the material, and then there are comments made perhaps by the analysand. I tried, but it looks strange or clumsy. To try then to say, that's not that important. Just to see what symbolically it could mean, that we could look at that in a totally different way, this big fist, for instance, it's an example which comes to my mind of a picture I didn't show you. A man in front of a woman, in between, in the middle, a black barrier, and then to the left, the author of the image himself with a very big fist. He says, well, I don't know how to paint, to draw fingers. It's really out of proportion. But in the whole understanding of the meaning of it, one gets, as an analyst, the impression, but it's so important to break through. It's an expression of an enormous amount of, in that case, of aggression against this something which cuts himself from reality of relationship to other beings. So suggest such a possible other aspect to what is critically perceived as a mishap and a lack of technical skill. So that's also a way to value, just to correct this fast, absolute, categoric judgments about one's own painting. These are ways, and then through, of course, if you are really amazed as an analyst about the obvious or the hidden beauty, the psychological reality, or something which is expressed through, you have, of course, to stay with the picture a longer time. It's not so obvious. But when you are through that really impressed yourself as an analyst, this comes through in the way you, without any comment. And so it's in this real, sincere appreciating of the meaning of the picture that this valuing also happens.
And you also, probably, you can get a feeling for the patient's emotional life. You can empathize with the picture and use that to get closer and to really get into their world and feel it. And I'm sure that has a very powerful effect. They feel that you really get it. You can see and understand what they're feeling. It's using the countertransference. How long do you typically stay with a picture? I mean, if somebody brings a picture, how long would you look at it with them, or walk around it, or, you know?
This can go over between 10 minutes to half an hour. I mean, if it's something very important, meaningful for the author of it, it can last very long.
And you could come back to it in another session.
Yeah.
As well. We've got time for maybe one more short one. Have we shortchanged Wilmington? Wilmington, do you have anything?
Wilmington would like to speak.
Okay.
Thank you. There's been a lot of talk about the process of, utilizing this ability that we all have inherently, which is our unconscious. And I haven't heard much about, it seems like Wilhelm's work of the I Ching, where Jung wrote the introduction to that. And some of what you were just speaking about is the witness consciousness, where we don't get in the way of the other, we allow the other to come and meet us and speak. And I was just wondering if Jung had any sort of mentorship or connection with those Eastern philosophies, any teachers, gurus, even in the color and the painting where the chakras also represent the emotions and the expressions of different areas of our emotional body. So I was wondering.
Yes. Oh, yes. Jung had a tremendous interest in Eastern thought, Eastern religion, Eastern philosophy, and yeah, there were a number of people he taught. Richard Wilhelm was one. Another one was Heinrich Zimmer. Heinrich Zimmer was an Indologist. He later went to Columbia, and he was Joseph Campbell's teacher. And he was an expert on Indian philosophy and Indian art, and he and Jung shared the podium on a number of occasions. Zimmer on Indian philosophy and Jung on psychoanalysis. And also there was a man named Hauer that he worked with, Hauer or Hoyer, on the Kundalini Yoga. They gave a seminar at the Psychological Club that you saw earlier in the interview together on Kundalini Yoga, and Sonu Shamdasani has edited that. You can read that. So there was a tremendous amount of interest on Jung's part in Eastern thought and of course the I Ching that you mentioned. And I think this really did fed his process as he got older. After the early 30s and into the late 30s, and then for the rest of his life, he died in 1961. He really focused much more on his own tradition, on the West, on Christianity, on the Bible, Christian doctrines. And he did that with the intention, I believe, of trying to help, trying to be a therapist to the tradition that he felt was badly floundering, that it really needed to integrate more of the feminine, more of the dark side, more of the material aspects of life, to create a greater sense of wholeness within the tradition. And I think since Jung's time, I think that has begun. I think it's happening within Christianity, at least within certain sections of it today, and also within Judaism, that the feminine is much more lifted up, much more appreciated than it was before, say, 1960, within the tradition, and also the shadow, the aspect of the shadow that one can read about in the biblical account of how God deals with human beings. There is a strong shadow aspect that Jung wrote about in Answer to Job. So that part of his life, the later part of his life, was focused quite a bit more on his own religious tradition, which was Christianity. But previous to that, from at least from 1910 until well into through the 20s, he read a lot, was very fascinated and interested in Eastern thought and Eastern religion. I think we've run out of time. We can have a future seminar on that subject, maybe, and Jung and the religions of the world. It's a lot to say about that. I want to thank you all on behalf of myself and Paul from Zurich. We're going to say goodbye to you now, and hope you enjoyed this and got benefit from it, and hope to see you again sometime. So, auf Wiedersehen.
Wiedersehen.
Paul and Corey, we just want to thank you again for such a wonderful presentation. It's been such a pleasure to conclude these, four pillars of Jungian psychotherapy, and today was truly a special one, just like all the others have been. And Paul and Murray, thank you again for such a wonderful presentation.
Very well, thank you.
We will have